At the prestigious Magical Academy, magical talent is the highest value attributed to its students. However, for those without magical aptitude, like Will Serfort, the future seems bleak. On dungeon floor 7, Will, accompanied by his whimsical companion Kiki, a black cat-like familiar with long ears, declares his intent to slay monsters. He repeats a mantra of determination, believing that even without magic, he can succeed if he tries hard enough. In a classroom, Professor Edward conducts a practical exercise, calling Will to the front. Under the professor's watchful gaze, Will attempts to conjure flames using a magical catalyst, but is met with ridicule from his classmates. Professor Edward chastises him, declaring that a student unable to perform even the simplest of spells is unfit to attend the academy. Shaun Ulster, a confident peer, demonstrates the spell effortlessly, furthering Will's humiliation. Edward emphasizes the academy's belief that magic is synonymous with authority, dismissing Will as a mere book learner without any real prospects. After class, Shaun and his friends taunt Will about his failures and his efforts to earn credits in the dungeon. Colette intervenes, defending Will and praising his kindness and hard work. Despite the ridicule, Will remains resolute, driven by a promise he made to a childhood friend. Elfaria, now known as the youngest mage Evander, once spoke to Will about the beautiful sunset beyond the sky, a vision that fuels his aspirations. In a meeting with Professor Werkner, Will is reprimanded for his dangerous solo expeditions to the dungeon. Despite Werkner's frustration, Will's determination to become a mage Evander is unwavering. He learns about a challenging monster, the Baskerville, located on dungeon floor 6, and resolves to defeat it to earn the necessary credits. As Will ventures into the dungeon, Shaun and his friends secretly plan to sabotage his efforts. In the darkened depths of the dungeon, Shaun stood, his thoughts clouded with disdain for those without magic. In his mind, someone who cannot use magic should not even speak of the mage Evander. It was grating, and the very sight of them offended him. He had no right to stay at the academy. Focused on his target, Shaun commanded that their target was the Baskerville, and that they would cast search on the area. Before he could finish, a massive fist from the shadows collided with Gordon, sending him flying across the dungeon with a gust so powerful it brushed past Shaun. Lyril turned, eyes widening as a monstrous figure emerged from the shadows, its fangs bared and red eyes glowing. Terrified, Lyril's scream echoed through the dungeon, reaching Will and his familiar Kiki, who were about to have a snack. Will's thoughts raced. That scream was unmistakable. Without hesitation, he sprinted towards the direction of the sound, leaping and landing behind a boulder. Shaun, alone and terrified on the floor, shot fire magic at the unfazed Baskerville. He screamed for it to stay away, his voice cracking with fear. Will, hidden behind the boulder, recognized the monster. An evil sentinel? That is worth 10 credits. A real over 5 enemy in the flesh. The sentinel's habitat should be deeper down. Did it come up to this floor? Moreover, that is Shaun. The evil sentinel began to approach Shaun, who continued to futilely cast spells. Shaun cried out in desperation. Will watched, torn. Shaun did not stand a chance. He had to help him. No, wait. Did he actually have any obligation to save him? Flashbacks of Shaun's bullying and disdain filled Will's mind. After the way Shaun had made fun of him? Shaun had bullied him to no end, had he not? If he ran away, would it not? Will's thoughts were interrupted by a memory of Elfaria. She had said that she knew Will was kind and braver than anyone. She had handed him a pair of goggles. Back in the present, Will grabbed his goggles, determination in his eyes. Elfie was wrong. All he wanted was to stand beside her. To be worthy of her. He was just a regular, pathetic, shameful guy. That was why, at the very least. As Shaun screamed, expecting his end, Will blocked the sentinel's strike with his sword, saving Shaun. He vowed to become like a lone sword. Meanwhile, back at the university, Professor Edwards rushed into Professor Werkner's office. Professor Edwards informed Werkner that Shaun and his lot went to the dungeon without permission. Werkner asked what he said, concerned. Professor Edwards repeated that the dungeon is vast, and they should use a familiar to find their whereabouts. Werkner asked what floor they were headed to, and Professor Edwards replied, Floor 6. Werkner responded calmly that there was no need for this, and Professor Edwards questioned why. Werkner explained that Will was there. Back in the dungeon, the sentinel's roar filled the air. Will, using his speed, circled around the sentinel, leaping and slicing off one of its fingers. Purple ooze splattered on the ground as the sentinel roared in anger. The monster struck again, causing an air blast and lifting dirt and smoke into the atmosphere. Will was thrown into the air but skillfully defended and dodged mid-air attacks. The sentinel scraped its sword on the ground, causing Will to be pushed back several meters as loose rocks flew up. The sentinel hit the rocks like bullets, but Will defended each strike, charging at the sentinel. He circled up the dungeon walls and came down, landing his sword in the sentinel's shoulder. Shaun, shocked by Will's skill, thought to himself, "What is this? Is that really the same Will?" Kiki watched and broadcasted the fight back to the professors using a crystal ball. Professor Edwards was in disbelief. He exclaimed that it was impossible. Werkner explained that Will was a true outlier, possessing superhuman strength a mage would never possess, a physique as robust as a dwarf's, and the observational skills to grasp an enemy's strategies after seeing them just once. Will, in the midst of battle, thought he had already seen that move. The evil sentinel struck again at Will, who climbed up the monster's sword and using his own sword to dig into the sentinel's blade like an ice pick. The sentinel swung its sword into a rock, attempting to crush Will, but Will dodged, falling through the air. The sentinel struck downwards, but Will, having seen this move before, easily evaded it and sliced off the sentinel's sword arm and sent it sailing through the air. The sentinel staggered back, its sword crashing to the ground upright. Will walked to the large sword, equipped it, and assumed a battle stance. The sentinel, its stomach emitting a sharp purple light, fired a laser beam at Will. Unfazed, Will absorbed the attack with the sentinel's own sword and countered, throwing the energy back. The attack sliced the sentinel's upper and lower body, causing a massive explosion. The sentinel's head flew through the air. Will approached Shaun, offering his hand to help him up. Will asked if Shaun was hurt. Shaun, gritting his teeth and bleeding from his mouth, remained silent, his pride shattered. The scene cut to Professor Edwards, walking away in disbelief. The video concludes with Will returning to Professor Werkner's office, where he is awarded 10 credits for defeating the evil sentinel. His achievement is a testament to his perseverance and potential to defy the Academy's expectations. As Will and Kiki celebrate, the narrator foreshadows the significant impact Will's journey will have on the world. This is the story of Wistoria, Wand and Sword, a tale of a boy who challenges the status quo and strives to unite the powers of magic and swordsmanship. 5 years ago, when Will was 10, random Academy students whispered among themselves, claiming that Will Serfort couldn't use magic. One student asked how he got into the magical academy. Another replied that he was bait to lure Lady Alfaria to the school. A third concluded that since Lady Alfaria had already become a mage Vander, Will would probably get kicked out. Will entered Headmaster Cauldron's office with Professor Werkner. The headmaster used magic to unsheath the dagger and sent it toward Will, who equipped it, and pushed Professor Werkner back, causing him to fall. Simultaneously, Will adopted a battle stance as red magic circles surrounded him. Without hesitation, he easily destroyed each circle by slashing, jumping, and kicking even before Werkner hit the floor. Both the professor and the headmaster were shocked, and the headmaster laughed. Headmaster Cauldron said Werkner should allow Will to continue attending the academy. Werkner questioned if this was certain since Will was unable to use magic. Cauldron replied that it was interesting for a sword to yearn to be a wand. Will asked if studying at the academy would allow him to ascend the tower and go to Elfie if he became strong. The headmaster replied that if Will was unfailingly diligent and his will stood firm, perhaps it would be possible. Will returned the dagger and left with Werkner. The headmaster thought to herself that since Will had no guardian, this responsibility fell on him. She wondered how it would turn out, imagining a sword aiming to become a wand. In Werkner's class, he explained that ascending the tower generally meant advancing to the upper institute, becoming one of the Magia Vander who reigned from the topmost floor of Mercedes Collis. To achieve this, one must be recognized by the highest center of learning. There were 2 principal methods of advancement: creating a new type of magic or earning at least 7,200 credits at the academy. Most students relied on the latter. He warned that everyone was in danger of not making graduation, let alone the upper institute, so he would thoroughly drill them in supplementary lessons. Students, including Will, thought to themselves that they were in trouble. After class, Will walked with Colette. Colette said she heard that Professor Werkner's supplemental class was unreal again. Will replied that they did everything from consecutive mock exams to rigorous magic instruction. Colette pointed out that Will had already earned every possible writing credit. Will mentioned that Professor Werkner could be too strict sometimes, but being a failure didn't mean he shouldn't work hard. Besides, Professor Werkner was kind to give them supplementary lessons at all, as most professors wouldn't give them a second thought. Colette agreed, noting that Professor Edward, in particular, didn't seem like he would ever bother with extra classes. As they walked down the hall, they came across Shaun, Gordon, and Lyril. Shaun was sitting down, while Lyril talked to a group of students. Lyril exclaimed that Shaun had slain the sentinel, which would probably increase Shaun's standing, leading to him replacing one of the top 3 soon. A student commented that was typical of Lord Shaun. Shaun, thinking to himself that the truth was different, saw Will through the gaps between the group. Shaun stood up with the same look he had when Will saved him and walked right up to Will, grabbing his cloak and causing Will to drop his books on the floor. Shaun said it must be some kind of joke that someone talentless like Will could achieve such things. Colette demanded to know why Shaun was doing this again, and what he was trying to accomplish. Shaun calmed down, let go, and walked away, followed by Lyril and the others. Colette asked Will if something had happened between them. Will replied that it was nothing much. Kiki climbed onto his shoulder, hissing at Shaun as he walked away. At the headmistress's office, Professor Edwards demanded Will Serfort be expelled. Headmistress Cauldron asked what had brought this on and noted that Will was already in his 6th and final year. To expel him now when he had come this far seemed unreasonable. Edwards argued that the academy had no need for someone who was a warrior and not a mage, someone who could surpass magic without being able to use it. Cauldron used magic to bring forth a book listing students, and quickly looked through it, stopping on Will's page. She observed that Will had good marks in writing and that his reports had an interesting perspective. Ignoring the fact that he couldn't use magic, he excelled to the degree that calling it mere excellence was insufficient. A magia vander aside, he could become an artificer or a healer. There were many paths open to him, and the academy had a duty to produce learned scholars for the fated day. Edwards retorted that the boy in question didn't seek to be a learned scholar but a magia vander. That was the issue. Cauldron acknowledged this problem and decided that Edward should give Will a test. Since Edward had now learned Will's secret, he would administer the test personally. Should Will fail to find his way through the test, Cauldron would entrust the matter of his advancement or expulsion to Edward. Edward warned that he was not as lenient as Werkner, but Cauldron confirmed her decision and left the content of the test up to him. Edward smirked and left, pleased with the result of the discussion. Cauldron sipped tea and thought to herself that Edward should test Will to his utmost, and determine the truth for himself. He, a dark viper mage, understood the magia vander better than anyone. Will and Colette stood at their lockers. Since Will couldn't use magic, Colette had to cast a spell to open his locker, as the locks operated solely through magic. Will felt bad for relying on her for help and apologized, but Colette reassured him it wasn't trouble at all. As she glanced inside his locker, she noticed his sword and remarked that he hadn't changed. Will replied that he'd never get permission to carry it on campus, and whenever he returned to the dorm, his roommate never let him leave. Colette noted that Rosti must be a really good friend, but Will insisted they were just regular friends. At the study hall, Colette and Will were doing some research. Will explained the history of the Battle of Garzeranso, where the dwarves, a race from another world, raised an army to wage war against the tower due to exploitation, overwork, and worse treatment than the elves. Will was reviewing other races' perspectives. Colette remarked that Will was already incredible in writing and didn't need to work so hard. Will explained that if he lost even 1 credit, he wouldn't be able to advance to the upper institute. He could understand how the dwarves felt, as their determination to never give up and fight could surpass even magic. Colette inquired if he learned that from Professor Werkner, and Will confirmed it, adding that he loved that saying and it motivated him to do his best. Colette noticed a white hair on Will and told him he was working too hard. She offered to pull it out for him, but Will declined. Colette insisted, and Will asked why. At that moment, Professor Edwards appeared behind Will, demanding to know what the commotion was. Both students stopped and looked up at the professor's cold gaze toward Will. Professor Edwards ordered Will to come to the spell hall immediately and alone. At the spell hall, Edwards said he couldn't overlook how Will continued to fail spell work, so he was giving him a supplemental lesson. Will was grateful but surprised that Edwards was giving a supplemental lesson just for him. Edwards confirmed it, and declared that he would ascertain Will's worth himself. He lifted his wand, and a purple magic circle appeared, causing a surge of energy to approach Will. Edwards assigned Will the task of landing a single strike on him, with refusal not being an option. If Will succeeded, he would be awarded 5 spellwork credits, but if he failed, he would be expelled. Edwards added that those without talent should not be permitted to even look upon the magia vander. He then pointed his wand at Will and a magic circle appeared under Will's feet. Professor Werkner approached the headmaster's office. Werkner asked if he had been called, and Cauldron confirmed it. Werkner entered and was instructed to look into a floating orb. Cauldron explained that Will Serfort had been assigned a test by Professor Edward. Should he fail, he would be expelled. Cauldron wanted Werkner to view the proceedings. The headmaster forbade anyone from stopping him. She acknowledged Professor Werkner's advocacy for Will, whom he had been watching over. Meanwhile, Edward summoned another magic circle and aimed at Will. The headmaster expressed that she must recognize Edward's concerns in equal measure. This was the decision he had made. Edward shot beams of magic at Will, who tried to dodge them. The headmaster explained that Edward was ascertaining whether Will was worthy of attempting to become a mage Evander. Werkner questioned why Professor Edward, of all people, was chosen for this task, calling it too cruel. The headmaster inquired why Werkner felt that way. Werkner declared that Edward was the closest to actually becoming a mage Evander. He might have been defeated before, but he was an ascendant who had reached the top of the tower. Edward unleashed a spell, causing a big explosion toward Will, who managed to dodge it. Will, admiring Edward's strength even though he used a low-level spell, recognized it as a low-level dark magic spell, yet with immense power. Will charged at the professor, using all his force by jumping, spinning, and landing a kick aimed at Edward, only to find that Edward had a magic barrier protecting him. Edward mocked Will for kicking at a magical shield, calling him hopeless. With a flick of his wand, Edward sent Will crashing to the floor. Will's glasses came off and cracked. He found himself on his back, in pain, looking at Edward with eyes wanting to shut. Will noticed that Edward was casting spells with no incantations, activating them quickly. There was no flaw in his offense or defense. Will found the strength to sit up and attempt to grab his glasses, but red ooze spilled from his mouth. He realized he couldn't even scratch Edward. Will admitted to himself that Edward was too strong. Kiki, also hurt, wobbled on the spot before retreating away. Edward stated that he would only use his black flames to burn Will and his shield to repel Will's unsightly savagery. He quoted magical doctrine number 27, saying those who would never attain 1,000 magics should strive to master a single one. Several magic circles appeared right above Will. Will understood that Edward was overlapping a single spell to fire a barrage of Dax Darbicans. Will started running to the side, but Edward changed the direction to follow Will and fired the bombardment. Edward declared that the talentless should simply disappear. The spell hit Will, sending him flying around the hall like a ping-pong ball. Will lost his glasses for the second time. Edward seemed to be enjoying himself, spinning around with his arms out, directing the magic. Will uncontrollably mirrored Edward's spinning motion but fell to the ground in pain, face first. Despite not wanting to give up, Will sat up and slammed his arm against the ground in exasperation, realizing he couldn't beat Edward. He understood that this was what a top-tier mage was like and wished he had his sword. Meanwhile, Colette, locking up her locker using a magic spell, wondered if Will was all right. She imagined various torturous scenarios involving Edward and Will. Suddenly, she snapped out of it, scared by her thoughts. As she realized the door had opened, she looked down to see a trail of red ooze leading to Will's familiar, who slowly approached her and pointed at Will's locker. Colette, understanding what she must do, opened Will's locker. Back at the hall, Will was face down on the ground, looking defeated while Edward walked towards him. Edward stated that the mage Evander were the pinnacle of all mages, and if Will could not overcome someone like him, he had no chance to reach such heights. Edward said a question regarding the Battle of Garzuranzo, asking how many mages it took to quell the battle. Will struggled to sit up but crashed back down. Edward forced Will's head down with his foot, and declared that it only took one mage to annihilate 10,000 dwarven warriors. Edward emphasized that a sword would never reach a wand and urged Will to abandon his foolish aspirations. Will, despite the pain, declared that he still wanted to reach the mage Evander. He pushed up, pinching the ground, and reiterated his desire while grabbing Edward's leg, causing Edward to push-kick himself free. Edward, curious, asked what noble reason drove Will. Will, taking out from his pocket the goggles Elfaria had given him, looked serious at Edward and declared he wanted to be with the person he loved. Edward was shocked. Will wanted to keep the promise he made with Elfie. Edward dismissed this as nonsense, calling it impure, immoral, and foul. Will admitted that even if his reason seemed ridiculous and the path harsh, he would go and see the sunset with Elfie. Colette, on a mission, entered the spell hall, running across the first-floor balcony area while hugging Will's sword against her chest. She shouted Will's name, throwing the weapon with precision down towards him. Will grabbed his sword, looking like a hero about to serve justice, and thanked Colette. Pleased with her throw, Colette celebrated. Edward, annoyed, looked displeased at Colette. Will unsheathed his sword. He put on the goggles and got into a battle stance. Edward stated that Will held a sword, not a wand, and called him a deviant. He declared that he would defeat Will blasting a single magic spell at him. Will easily destroyed it using his sword. Edward was surprised, realizing Will had sliced through his magic. He wondered if Will's sword was a Moria blade but continued his attack. Will recognized another magical barrage coming and felt scared. His arms and legs were shaking, but he knew this was his only way through the barrier to become a mage Evander. Will charged at Edward. Edward declared it was over. Colette shouted Will's name. Will used the rocks from Edward's blast as stepping stones to climb through the air. Will remembered the story of the Battle of Garzuranzo, where a brave dwarven general named Gareth fought even as he lost all his brethren. Despite everything, Gareth landed a single blow. The mages recognized the dwarf's status in honor of his bravery. Edward fired magic shots at Will, who defended, and sent loose rocks back at the professor, hitting his barrier. Will charged forward, thinking that a sword could indeed reach a wand. He jumped to the ceiling right above Edward and, with the force of his legs and gravity, delivered a shattering downward blow to Edward's barrier, destroying it. As the barrier crumbled, a flash of light erupted, and both paused, trying to process what had happened. Will broke the ice and coughed. A cut appeared on Edward's face, blood was drawn. Edward walked away, crediting Will for his performance. Edward announced that Will Serfort was hereby awarded 5 credits. Colette ran to support Will, shouting his name as he fell back. Looking out of it, she shook him, asking if he was all right. At the headmaster's office, Cauldron and Werkner had seen the whole show. The headmaster praised Will's performance. Werkner acknowledged that Will chose to dive into the barrage, hit himself, and attacked from a blind spot overhead. The headmaster noted that Will's strike was powerful enough to break through Edward's shield and that he could manage a slashing attack capable of overcoming magic. It was truly as though Will was undaunted. In a flashback to Will's last conversation with Alfaria spoke to Will. She mentioned knowing he was kind and braver than anyone. She handed him the goggles he always wore and bade him farewell before beginning to walk away. Will called out to her, determined to make it to the tower even if he could not use magic, and promised to come for her no matter what, so they could see the sunset together. Alfaria turned around, smiling, and promised to wait as long as it took. Werkner approached Will and addressed him. Will acknowledged him, stating that his current bout of sobbing would be the last time. Will Serfort, a no-talent and book learner who excelled only in writing, was also a working student. While doing his newspaper round with Kiki on his shoulder, Mr. Donnan called out to him, noticing how bright and early he was. Will greeted him and continued with his paper deliveries, promising to wait for Mr. Donnan at Gina's tavern later. Will carried on running to complete his paper round. As Will ran up the stairs, he tripped, causing all his newspapers to fly out of his bag. He quickly caught all the papers and repositioned the fallen Kiki, but a single paper fell to the ground. He muttered to himself and picked up the paper, reading the front page about Alfaria creating new original magic, being the first to invent 12 magics. Will thought about how hard Alfaria was working and resolved to do his best too. He read on about the Upper Institute passing an order from Alfaria herself, which shocked him. Once back in his room, he called out to his roommate Rosti, asking if he could make him a magic item. Rosti inquired why Will was rushing around. Will explained that Alfaria had sent down an order, and he had to go. Rosti asked about his lessons, and Will mentioned that he did not have class that day, so he was prioritizing the order. Will explained that the order was to collect Frostwalker ice cores, which Alfaria needed for magic catalysts. He needed Rosti's magic items to reach the 4th floor. Rosti remarked on Will's straightforwardness and handed him improved versions of the previous magic items. Will thanked Rosti, who then gave him food and urged him to take care. Mage Queen Mercedes, one of the great pioneers, once spoke about the significance of dungeons and the importance of turning the unknown into the known. As Will arrived at the dungeon floor, he saw many students defeating monsters. He noticed the turnout and prepared to proceed, but a big blast knocked him off balance, revealing Shaun and his goons. Lyril and Gordon complimented Shaun on his fire magic, which blew all the Frostwalkers away. Shaun thought about how weak the monsters were and recalled a time when Will fought to save him. Meanwhile, Will was amazed at Shaun's fire magic and decided to go deeper into the dungeon as there would not be anything left to hunt at the current level. Will encountered 3 monsters threatening a girl and quickly put on his goggles, killing the monsters with 3 strikes. The girl, stunned, realized he used a sword instead of magic. Will checked if the girl was all right, and she thanked him for saving her. She introduced herself as Iris. In Werkner's class, he lectured on the profound achievement of creating new magic and its significance in advancing to the tower. Colette, sitting next to her friend, thought about how difficult it was to create new magic. Werkner praised Alfaria, calling her an incredible mage for authoring 12 original spells. Students expressed their admiration for Alfaria, with some considering joining the Ice faction. Colette's friend teased her about being jealous of Alfaria, thinking she would steal Will away. Colette dismissed the idea as ridiculous. Professor Werkner noticed them talking and reprimanded them, resuming his lecture. Colette thought about whether Will was in the dungeon because of Alfaria. Iris spoke to Will, mentioning she had heard about him as an upperclassman book learner, clarifying she was 2 years younger. He wondered if she was a 4th-year student. Iris assured him that she did not look down on him despite his lack of magical talent, and expressed respect for people with their own gifts. Will asked if Iris was there for the order as well, and she confirmed, wanting to be of use to the Magia Vander and hold up the sky. Will realized Iris was serious about her ambitions. He thought about how their world was hidden under the Great Barrier, and the students' efforts were to support the sky. Iris recounted meeting Elfaria in the dungeon, describing how Elfaria had saved her from a dire predicament by wiping out monsters with ice magic. Will listened to Iris's story and acknowledged her experience. Kiki then got Will's attention and led him away while Iris continued talking, unaware he had left. Iris turned around and found Will analyzing ice fragments left by frost walkers, explaining the presence of a powerful one-up ahead that normal search spells could not detect. Iris was surprised by Will's knowledge despite his inability to use magic. Will explained that magic was not absolute in the dungeon and that experience and wisdom could make up for the lack of magical ability. Will and Iris stood in the dungeon when Iris questioned the value of experience. Will confirmed it just as a large blue ice monster attempted to ambush them from above. Will, undeterred, grabbed Iris and leaped to safety, narrowly avoiding the Frost Rex's landing, which sent a mushroom cloud of ice shards and dust billowing into the air. Iris, shocked, identified the creature as a Frost Rex, the highest form of Frost Walker, worth 6 credits, making it a formidable over 5 enemy specific to the 4th floor. The Frost Rex unleashed a searing blue beam of icy energy toward them, but Will swiftly evaded it, watching as the frigid blast caused crystalline ice shards to erupt from the dungeon floor where it struck. After ensuring Iris was out of harm's way, he instructed her to stay put. Iris, however, protested, explaining that physical attacks were futile against the Frost Rex, as anything that touched it would freeze instantly, making close combat impossible. She noted that the creature was infamous as a dwarf killer, and could only be defeated with long-range magic attacks. Despite her warnings, Will confidently approached the monster, assuring her that he had overcome similar foes before. Will's charge cracked the ice beneath his shoes as he charged at the Frost Rex, dodging another beam and jumping over the monster. With the magic items from Rosti in hand, he slid beneath the Frost Rex, leaving it confused. The Rex fired beams wildly, causing parts of the dungeon to collapse. Iris ran to safety but continued watching from behind a wall. Will threw a grappling hook that looped around the monster and hooked its underbelly. The rope, connected to a pulley attached to Will's glove, allowed him to bind the monster, causing its surface to crack. Will recognized that the Frost Rex was weak to flames and explosive attacks. He turned the pulley on his glove, igniting the rope and causing a devastating explosion that shattered the monster's face. The aftershock wave was immense. Iris screamed, raising her arms to shield herself from the blast. When the dust settled, only ice pieces remained, and Will retrieved the hook, pleased with the result. Will remarked that Rosti's magic items were impressive, and that he would thank him later. Iris thought about the disparity between the rumors she had heard about Will and the real person, pondering how to report her findings. Will asked Iris if they should head back, and she agreed. The scene shifted to the Wizard's Tower, where Iris walked through a corridor, reflecting on Will's creativity and experience in compensating for his lack of magic. She removed her glasses and adjusted her hair, recognizing that while Will was no mage, he was a talented warrior. She entered a room where 4 Magia Vander mages were meeting and knelt, asking for a moment of their time. In front of her were 4 out of 5 Magia Vander mages, Cariad and Kindia Wiseman, Elenil Josalf, Zeo Thorzus Reinbolt, and Elfaria Albis Serfort, with the middle seat empty. Cariad assured her that they were not in the midst of any pressing business, merely holding a routine meeting. Zeo commented on the celestial host watching from beyond the sky and their overwhelming numbers. Eleanor emphasized the need for promising new talent to prevent the Lore's dire prophecy from coming to pass. Zeo inquired about any promising individuals, and Iris mentioned Will Serfort, the no-talent who could not use magic but showed great potential. She recommended him for a position in the tower. Cariad dismissed the idea as impossible, while Eleanor expressed displeasure at the thought of increasing the number of inferior people. Zeo, however, found the idea intriguing, stating he would even accept a dwarf if they were useful. Eleanor, offended, questioned Zeo's presence among them. Cariad intervened, calming them and suggesting they wait until after the Grand Magic Festival to make a decision. Zeo and Eleanor's auras dispersed, and they agreed to let the festival results guide their choice. The meeting concluded, and the 3 mages teleported out. Iris, now alone with Elfaria, remarked on the interesting nature of Will. Elfaria, smiling, expressed her anticipation, stating she would be waiting for Will. Of the 12,000 total credits available at the Academy, 7,200 were required for a student to advance to the Upper Institute, an absolute condition for becoming a Magia Vander. Shaun shouted. Prim Serb! He used a magic circle above a golem to spill fire down and destroy it. Colette followed with Steer Viola! She used magic circles to teleport boulders over the golems, also destroying them. A professor on a balcony above, assessing the students, announced that Shaun Ulster and Colette Lawyer had both passed. Shaun had 9,889 credits, and Colette had 7,340. Will, equipped with a wand, was next. He dodged the golem with ease, but as he charged to deliver a punch, he was distracted by two onlooking students who commented that it was absurd for a student of their magical academy to plan on punching a golem. Will froze, looking toward the two critics, and the golem landed a hit on him, sending him falling to the ground. One critic remarked that Will couldn't use magic and couldn't even scratch a golem, while the other added that they expected nothing less from a book learner, an eternal failure in spellwork. Meanwhile, another two students, a female named Lehanna Owenzos and an elven male named Wignall Linder, were also battling golems. Lehanna shouted, Sagius Leo, using magic electric arrows to rain down and pierce her golem before using a final lightning strike to explode it. Wignall used wind magic to create a tornado, shouting, Zephyros Claw, lifting and spinning the golem until there was nothing but smoke. Lehanna had 10,100 credits, while Wignall had 10,075 credits. Next up was an ice magic user called Julius Reinberg, who fired ice at all the remaining golems. An ice flower appeared on the golems where contact was made. Julius mouthed the words, Ice over, and the golems became encased in ice. Other students noted that Julius had frozen theirs too. Julius had 10,048 credits. The professor declared that Julius Reinberg passed. Lehanna commented that it seemed neither of the others had lost their skills. Wignall replied there was no reason he should have. The time for revels was already drawing near. Julius declared his intent for war with his newly acquired secret method, promising to defeat both Lehanna and Wignall. He asked if they would accept this in place of a gauntlet, making an ice flower using magic and sending it floating towards them. Wignall hit the flower with magic, slicing it to pieces before Lehanna electrified the pieces to find shining dust. Wignall expressed he looked forward to it. Onlooking students remarked that it was no wonder it was already confirmed they were going to the Upper Institute. They referred to Lehanna as Miss Perfect and the elf as Master Wignall, noting they were the only ones with over 10,000 credits, along with Julius. Shaun observed, displeased. Will thought that a student's credits were like an index by which their skills could be judged. He didn't have enough to graduate, let alone advance to the Upper Institute, as he only had 5,405 credits. It was his last year in school. He slid down a pillar he was leaning on in sadness. His familiar attempted to comfort him before noticing and hissing at Julius and his goons. Julius told him he was in the way and asked him not to show himself in his presence. Will apologized, standing up as Julius walked past. Goon 1 remarked that Julius had passed with just one spell again, noting it was no wonder he was one of their year's top 3. Goon 2 added he was sure to get scouted at the Grand Magic Festival. Will acknowledged it was already that time again. Later, in the food hall, Will and Colette were having lunch. Background chatter included students discussing the odds of winning this year's Sky Race and focusing on the duel. Colette told Will he would just have to get scouted at the Grand Magic Festival too, mentioning the rumor that the elf faction was prioritizing those who rank highly in magic craft. Will was taken aback. Colette continued, saying that advancing to the Upper Institute on writing and praxis alone was unrealistic. However, there was a precedent for a student being scouted and ascending the tower on the spot, even with less than 7,200 credits. Will thought about how everyone was trying to turn things around with one shot around the time of the Grand Magic Festival, making them all out for blood. Will recounted that the Grand Magic Festival was an event held by Rigarden Magical Academy once every 2 years. A number of different competitions were held, and high mages came down from the tower as scouts. Colette explained that the Grand Magic Festival was essentially a contest between students from the different tower factions, where advancement to the tower was decided. The factions included the Lightning Lord's Wand, Thor's Fass, the Sacred Elf's Wand, Elif Kanan, the Flame Emperor's Wand, Inkindia Barum, the Ice Maiden's Wand, Albis Vina, and the Light Sovereign's Wand, Masteria's Noah, with the current Magia Vanda leading these 4 major factions. If one of those factions chose a student, their admittance as a tower member was assured. Will noted that skipping the requirements for graduation and going straight to the tower hardly ever happened. He would have to perform some kind of magic that would put a high mages to shame. Colette added that watchers were said to appear at the Grand Magic Festival, snatching up outstanding talents and carrying them off to the tower. Will dismissed this as one of the Academy's 7 legends, considering himself a no-talent who shouldn't try to stand out at the Grand Magic Festival. He planned to work behind the scenes again this year, helping with operations. Colette encouraged him, saying entering would change how people saw him. Will appreciated her support but felt entering would turn the event into a regular sports event, recalling a rough time from their second year when he was booed and accused of cheating. Colette and Will were standing by a window in the locker room observing the outdoor view. Colette remarked on the closeness of the Grand Magic Festival. Will agreed. Colette noted that scouts from other capitals besides Rigarden would be coming, suggesting other paths for Will even if they couldn't ascend the tower. Will acknowledged that the Grand Magic Festival was the perfect opportunity to showcase abilities. Colette urged him to promote himself. Will reiterated he couldn't use magic. Colette noticed something unusual. Will asked if something was wrong. Colette detected a hidden barrier, likely an inhibitor and a sound-dampening barrier. She considered breaking it by force with magic but instead used Kiki to reveal and disperse the barrier. A hidden stairway was revealed. Colette heard something and urged them to go. They discovered an underground gambling ring. A bookkeeper was taking bets on who would win each event at the Grand Magic Festival. Gambling students were placing bets on Lehana, Wignall, Julius and Shaun. Will was shocked by the underground gambling. Colette couldn't believe the students' behavior. Shaun and his goons were on the balcony, looking down at the gambling action. Shaun viewed his poster, angered, and ripped it up. Will and Colette walked across the balcony. Will stopped awkwardly when he saw Shaun ahead and addressed him. Shaun, looking annoyed, called Will a laggard and asked why he was there. Colette pointed her wand at Shaun's face, telling him to stop being violent, and warning him she would get seriously angry if he was rough with Will again. Shaun stepped back, gritting his teeth. Will asked Shaun why he was there, noting it didn't look like he had been gambling. Shaun dismissed the question. Gordon and Lyril, Shaun's goons, defended him, saying it wasn't about betting odds or being concerned about Lehana and the others. Shaun shouted at them to stop talking. The gambling crew downstairs looked up at Shaun, confused. Gordon and Lyril apologized. Colette teased Shaun, saying he was a boy after all. Shaun, gritting his teeth, claimed he wasn't particularly concerned and hadn't been beaten by Lehana and Wignall. He explained that the credits he lagged behind them were simply credits lost in writing exams, and that he had been training ever since. In terms of magical skill, he considered himself just as good as Lehana and Wignall. Colette moved behind while lifting Kiki to the balcony railing's edge. Shaun realized he was explaining himself to Will and abruptly barged past him. Colette called out, and his goons quickly followed, yelling his name. Will thought it was no wonder everyone was so excited about the festival held once every 2 years. In a classroom, the professor concluded the lesson, stating that was all for the day and that next time they would craft some magic potions. The professor advised the students to review the material and prepare for the lesson. Will turned to his familiar Kiki, indicating the class was over. Colette approached and asked what was planned after this. If a trip to the dungeon was intended, she'll go with him. Will apologized, explaining he was working at Miss Gina's tavern that night. Colette was visibly upset but accepted the explanation. At Gina's tavern, the Hen and Beanstalk, Gina called out to Will, instructing him to take the dish out. The order was for 1 Goulard beans sauté. Will, working diligently, was encouraged by a drinking dwarf, Mr. Donnan, who recognized his hard work, balancing newspaper delivery in the mornings, being a student during the day, and waiting tables at night. Will explained he needed to work to pay his tuition, as he was not eligible for a scholarship. Donnan suggested the Grand Magic Festival could fix his financial issues but Will dismissed the idea, saying he couldn't enter it. Gina reminded Will to keep working, pointing out his buddy Rosti working hard without using magic. Rosti balanced plates and reassured Will, stating that working without magic was a fun new experience. He added that there was no need to worry, he would help a roommate in a bind. Gina then requested that Will bring another part-timer, which left him feeling unsettled. The customers offered reassurance, saying that he could handle the work, expressing that he was like a brother to the dwarves and hinting at their shared challenge with magic. As the night progressed, Rosti asked if Will was all right with his low wages, suggesting Professor Werkner could help him find a better job. Will expressed his affection for the dwarves, for their hearty spirits, love of alcohol, and skilled attributes. Despite his situation, they had welcomed him warmly. Julius and his goons entered the tavern. Rosti recognized their uniform from the academy. Julius, noticing Will, mocked him and the dwarves, calling them an inferior race. Will recounted the historical disdain for dwarves, who had fled their world destroyed by the celestial host. Julius demanded food and drink, further insulting the dwarves. Rosti brought a plate of food, and the goons mocked its quality and smell. Will had enough, walked to Julius's table, and demanded he take back the insults. Julius retorted, calling them filthy brutes, and Will defended the dwarves' hard work and earnest toil. Inspired by Will's words, Gina and Donnan looked on gratefully. Julius, unfazed, mocked the dwarves' inability to use magic, flicking the plate of beans at Will. Unfazed, Will grabbed the collars of 2 goons, slamming them into the floorboards, splattering food on Julius. Julius, with an evil smile, began freezing the room, sending icicle shards toward Will. He dodged, but more followed, knocking off his glasses. As a spell pinned him to the wall, Julius placed an ice flower on Will's chest and stabbed him with his wand. Donnan protested, and Rosti prepared to help. Julius's smile faded as he saw Will's unfazed cold eyes. Changing his mind, Julius challenged Will to enter the Grand Magic Festival, promising to humiliate him in front of all the spectators. Will agreed, grasping Julius's wand in a gesture that sealed their upcoming duel. The terms were clear: if Will emerged victorious, Julius would have to apologize to Donnan and the others. On the day of the Grand Magic Festival, the headmaster addressed the participants, urging them to improve, compete, and strive. She quoted their founder, Mercedes, emphasizing the importance of reaching one's utmost potential and supporting the sky without ever serving as a foundation for evil. With these words, she officially declared the festival open. In the bustling stadium, Fire Faction Scout Raj remained ever vigilant, instructing his subordinates to scrutinize every match closely, knowing they might uncover hidden talent. His team responded in unison, ready for the task. As the students raced their wyverns through checkpoints, the spectators watched intently. Palm, one of the onlookers, marveled at the sight, commenting that Lady Lihanna seemed poised to win the sky race. Flip, another spectator, acknowledged her prowess, noting that she did not stand at the top of the school for nothing. Meanwhile, a third spectator wondered out loud why the Earth Princess had not entered the magic craft competition this year. Watching the games with Iris, the headmaster observed that the scouts mingling in the packed audience were already showing signs of interest. Iris explained that mages from outside the tower attended the festival, making it a prime opportunity for scouts to identify the academy's most promising students. The announcer then proclaimed that Miss Perfect had not only defended her title but also set a new record, claiming her second consecutive sky race victory and surpassing previous champions. As Iris excused herself, the headmaster inquired about her early departure. Iris responded that she had work to attend to and mentioned she needed to cheer on a particular upperclassman. Lyril and Gordon, who could not participate in the crown attack, cheered on their friend Shaun, urging him to do his best. Shaun, always eager to impress, assured them that he would not let down a lady in need. A flashback revealed Colette's plea to Shaun, where she admitted she could only count on him to join their team. Shaun, with a smug smile in the present, thought to himself that Colette had finally realized she needed someone capable by her side, and between him and the laggard, he was the obvious choice. However, upon entering the athlete's waiting room and seeing Will with Colette, Shaun's confidence wavered. Shaun was surprised, wondering what the laggard was doing there. Colette explained that she had indeed asked Shaun to join their team because, to participate in the crown attack, their team needed at least 21,000 combined credits, making Shaun's inclusion their only option for Will to compete. Will apologized for dragging Shaun into the situation, but Shaun was visibly irritated. He retorted that it was not funny, questioning why he should help a no-talent like Will and why Will was trying to enter an upper-level event in the first place. Frustrated, he demanded that Will say something, but Will's attention was on Julius, who had confidently walked in behind Shaun, smiling at Will with ill intentions. Shaun, feeling ignored, recalled past humiliations. He was infuriated that, after all that had happened, Will was looking right past him. His thoughts lingered on a past encounter on Dungeon Floor 6, where their rivalry had intensified. As the afternoon events of the Magic Festival began, the announcer, Mike Mayes, introduced himself and the event's commentary. He playfully introduced the commentator, Professor Edward Serfence, known as the most hated professor, with students often imagining him as a sinister figure ready to whip them with his wand. Mayes joked nervously as Edward threatened to have a coffin ready for his next class. The announcer then shifted focus to the main event, the crown attack. Members of the elf faction began a ritual, invoking an illusion that symbolized the return of their homeland. They recited ancient words, establishing a domain filled with diverse zones: the volcano, marshland, badlands, grassland, and woodland zones. Mayes excitedly explained the rules of the crown attack, noting that it was a team competition held between three-man cells. Teams started at the outer edge of the field and made their way to the central stadium, where the crown awaited. The first team to claim the crown would win, but they would face not only natural obstacles but also a multitude of traps set by elite professors. Mayes emphasized that in this brutal and heated event, anything was allowed, from smashing through obstacles to obstructing other teams, making it a true battle royale. Edward added that the event was designed as a practical demonstration of how three-man cells dealt with irregularities, drawing parallels to dungeon raids. He noted that scouts were particularly interested, given the excellence of the participating students. Mayes then hinted at the excitement of seeing brilliant students engage in high-level battles, mentioning the secret gambling halls where Squad 12 led by Wignall Linder and Squad 9 led by Julius Reinberg were the most popular bets. Despite this, Mayes also pointed out the least popular team, Squad 6, which included Will, a no-talent contender. Spectators in the stands laughed at the mention of Will, questioning why he entered the crown attack and saying he was shaming the academy. Rosti, watching from the stands while holding Kiki, observed the unfolding events, his thoughts focused on Will. As the crown attack began, Werkner, overseeing the squads in the Badlands zone, was surprised to see Will among the participants. Shaking him, Werkner asked in disbelief if Will truly intended to compete, reminding him of past warnings to stay out of the magic festival. Despite this, Will apologized but remained determined to win, even if it meant becoming a laughingstock. Werkner, still stunned, warned him not to blame him for any consequences. Maius, the announcer, excitedly declared the official start of the crown attack. As the event commenced, one of Julius's subordinates noticed a stone circle ahead, but Julius corrected him, recognizing it as something more. Maius quickly pointed out that the competitors were already facing the golem thicket, a formidable and large-scale obstacle. The question hung in the air: would they be able to make it through? As the magical camera broadcasted the event, Maius's voice carried surprise as he noticed Will from Squad 6 charging forward. Palm, a spectator, dismissed it as a one-man suicide attack, while Flip remarked that a no-talent like Will could never beat the golems, referencing Will's previous failure to even scratch one during a praxis exercise. Unfazed, Will called out to Colette, who chanted a spell that conjured a magical gauntlet on Will's arm. With a single, powerful strike, Will punched through the golems, causing a magic surge that sent shockwaves through the arena. Palm and Flip were knocked from their seats, stunned along with the rest of the crowd as they witnessed Will's punch broadcasted live. Werkner, astonished, questioned what had just happened, admitting that he had feared such an outcome. Colette calmly explained that even though Will could not use magic, attacking with a magical gauntlet did not break any rules. Maius, still in disbelief, announced that Will Serfort was the first to break through the golem thicket, much to the amazement of the spectators. Shaun, meanwhile, sulked as he thought back to a time when he had been saved by Will. The memory gnawed at him, filling him with a desperation that drove him to build up every ounce of strength he could muster. Yet, despite all his efforts, Will still managed to surpass him. Shaun's thoughts were filled with disbelief and frustration. Maius continued to narrate the unfolding events, exclaiming that Will Serfort had taken a huge lead and that Squad 6 was now leading the charge as they stormed through the Badlands zone. As magic cubes launched earth missiles at Will's group, Colette warned Will of the danger. Will responded swiftly, using the magical gauntlet to punch the earth, creating an earth shield that protected them from the incoming attack. Wasting no time, Will leaped forward, calling out to Colette. Colette summoned a series of magical swords that she placed in the ground in front of Will. As Will ran past, he equipped and threw the swords at the magic cubes, destroying them one by one. Holding onto the last sword, Will sliced the final cube as Squad 6 pushed forward. Maius was amazed, declaring that Squad 6 had made it through the Badlands with ease. The speed and precision of their movements left him astounded. Palm, still in disbelief, questioned if the laggard was actually capable, while Flip marveled at Colette's incredible magic. Fire Scout Raj observed Will's swift actions, noting how quickly he detected and countered the traps. Professor Edwards, watching closely, commented that Will's experience in the dungeon had honed his reflexes, allowing him to break through with minimal inefficiency. From the stands, Iris cheered on Will, surprising the crowd, who hadn't expected him to have any supporters. A magical camera followed the squads as they advanced, with Maius narrating their progress. As one of the squads, frustrated by their own lagging pace, fell behind and got caught by flower monsters, Maius noted that the traps were as merciless as ever this year. Maius continued to follow Will's squad, speculating whether the no-talent could really be the first to reach the stadium. The entire crowd was now cheering wildly for Squad 6. Meanwhile, Julius, casually confident as he froze the flower monsters in his path, heard the commotion coming from the stadium and asked his subordinates for a status report. A subordinate revealed that, according to their search spell, the no-talent squad was in the lead. Julius, still smiling, assured them that it would not be a problem and continued forward, leaving a trail of ice in his wake. Maius announced that Squad 6 had reached the final area, the Enchanted Woods. Will, running in front, noticed a chain circle trap and quickly devised a plan to make them cancel each other out by circling each trap with his sword. As the traps fired upon themselves, Will remained unfazed, continuing forward. Maius asked Professor Edwards for his opinion on the situation, noting that the professor, who had set up the dark magic minefield, gritting his teeth, was clearly displeased. Will, aware of the crown attack's mechanics, knew they were likely to encounter other squads the closer they got to the stadium. He strategized to secure advantageous terrain and prepare for a confrontation with Julius. Just as Will was deep in thought, an ice spell narrowly missed him, tearing through his cape. Colette, alarmed, asked if he was alright. Will, though shaken, confirmed that he was fine, but his thoughts raced. He wondered how Julius had managed to get ahead of them. Could he be alone, or were his teammates hiding somewhere? Julius, with a casual demeanor, commanded his magic to scatter, unleashing a barrage of ice upon Will. Will quickly refocused, determined to confront Julius right there and then. Meanwhile, Shaun, enveloped in flames, melted the ice around him. His voice, filled with determination, began chanting a spell of immense power, invoking the memory of a fiery torment that had once burned him to nothingness. Colette and Will, confused by Shaun's sudden appearance and his powerful flames, could only watch in shock. Colette urged Will to run as Shaun unleashed a devastating fire blast. She raised an earth wall just in time to shield Will from the attack. Maius, observing the shockwave, was astounded, questioning what had just happened. Will, disoriented, wondered if he had been hit as he surveyed the destruction around him. The sea of trees behind him was reduced to ashes. Shaun, told Julius to leave, claiming that he was in the way. Colette, still on the ground, realized with a sinking feeling that Shaun had deliberately aimed at both Julius and Will. Confusion and suspicion gripped her as she tried to make sense of Shaun's actions. Colette, baffled by Shaun's actions, asked him what he was thinking. Shaun, his voice filled with bitterness, declared that he had played along with Colette's plans long enough and now demanded his due. He challenged Will to a fight, declaring that he would rather die than forgive himself for being saved by someone like him. Will, still reeling from the unexpected turn of events, asked why Shaun wanted to fight now, of all times. Shaun fired at Will once more, his hatred evident. He shouted that he did not need a reason to crush Will, his offense to the ears and eyes justification enough. Colette, desperate to stop the madness, tried to intervene, but a wall of ice blocked her path. She realized with shock that Julius had somehow escaped the bombardment earlier. Julius, now more serious, began to ice over the battlefield. Will, seeing the situation spiraling out of control, pleaded with Shaun to stop, insisting that this was not the time for them to be fighting each other. But Shaun, unmoved, told Will to hurry up and grab his sword, mocking him as a laggard. Will, with no other choice, retrieved his sword and assumed a battle stance, preparing to face Shaun in a fight he never wanted. Shaun, reflecting on his childhood interactions with Will. As children, Will was frequently bullied, with notes labeling him as a worthless no-talent stuck to his back. Distressed by this, Shaun tried to help by burning off the note with his wand and offering Will a position as his underling to spare him further humiliation. However, Will ignored Shaun's offer and walked away, prompting Shaun to grab him and demand attention. Will, uninterested, told Shaun to leave him alone and continued walking, which enraged Shaun. From that moment on, Shaun harbored a deep resentment toward Will for never acknowledging him. In the present, Will is dodging Shaun's relentless fire attacks in a forest, using the trees for cover. Despite Will's skillful deflection of flames, a fire whip caught his leg, lifting him into the air. Will cut himself free but faced continuous attacks, which he managed to fend off. Frustrated, Shaun accused Will of merely dodging and demanded he fight back. Will refused, stating they were on the same team and he had a promise to Mr. Donnan and the others to keep needing to stay focused on his goal. Ignoring this, Shaun threatens to burn Will to cinders and unleashes another fiery spell. Meanwhile, Commutator Maius watches the chaos unfold and asks Professor Edward for his thoughts. Edward, enjoying the spectacle, criticizes the infighting among team members as unacceptable, even though it makes for an entertaining display. He notes that the Tower Scouts will view this as a significant mark against Squad 6, damaging their chances. Despite Shaun's prior achievements, which had placed him fourth in his year, this incident reveals him to be immature and unprofessional. Rosti and Kiki were watching the scene unfold, puzzled by Shaun's actions, as they had never seen teammates fight before. They speculated on what might happen next. Iris approached them, asking if she could sit with them. Rosti recognized her, and Iris introduced herself cheerfully, noting it had been a while since they last met. Rosti invited her to sit, and Iris joined them, cheering for Will to succeed. Rosti was surprised, noting it was unusual for Iris to cheer for someone specifically, as she typically followed the crowd. Iris confessed she had become obsessed with Will after hearing about him, even showing a dagger pendant symbolizing her new interest. Amused, Rosti noted how popular Will seemed to be, despite currently fighting Shaun. Iris asked Rosti if she was there to support Will. Rosti smiled and replied affirmatively, explaining that she loved Will more than anything, noting that Will was a roommate and that Colette likely felt the same way. Meanwhile, Colette was seen running from ice attacks, trying to intervene in the fight between Will and Shaun. She suddenly spotted Julius, who taunted her about her Earth Princess title. Colette snapped back, threatening to beat him up if he called her that again, while dodging ice shards fired at her. Determined, she used an earth wall to defend herself but accidentally set off a trap, realizing Julius had used the blast to trigger it. Elsewhere, Palm and Flip noticed something odd, questioning why there seemed to be so many Juliuses, as he appeared to be on every battlefield opposing every squad. Wignall noticed Julius and asked if he had come to see him. Julius confirmed he had declared war and would use his secret weapon to defeat them all. Wignall smirked, and summoning a magic circle beneath Julius, revealed him to be an ice clone that shattered into pieces. Wignall mused that he had never imagined Julius would use such a trick. Wignall identified the blue crystal he held as one of the Magia Vanders. Maius, still confused by the events, was pleased that Julius had been defeated by Squad 12, as he had bet on Wignall to win. He praised the elves and Wignall, cheering for his life savings, and Wignall waved confidently at the camera. Elf Lafia, scouting for the elf faction, asked about their kinsman at the academy. Elf Filvis rated him as average, neither excelling nor failing, which Lafia found harsh. Filvis, uncomfortable with the festival atmosphere, expressed her wish to leave immediately. Lafia reminded her they couldn't leave as this was a festival for the Ryzenth. She then pondered how to report the situation to Lady Eleanor. Filvis speculated that the final outcome might be a contest between Julius and Master Wignall. Spectators noted how close Squad 6 had been to victory, wondering if Shaun's interference had changed the outcome. They were concerned about the possibility of someone they viewed as no talent winning, which would be unprecedented. Gordon was puzzled by Shaun's actions, understanding his dislike for Will but finding his behavior at the Grand Magic Festival confusing. Lyril admitted admitted to understanding Shaun's feelings, but he thought trying to get someone expelled for personal grievances was excessive. In the forest, as trees burned around him, Will pondered why Shaun was so obsessed with him. He reflected on past encounters, questioning the hostility, since he had never provoked anyone, and was aware of his own shortcomings. Will never sought Shaun's approval, only wanting to be left alone to focus on his own goals. He recalled when Shaun had tried to recruit him into his group, and his determination to reach Elfie. In the present, Shaun summoned a fire falcon guardian. As the falcon charged, Will dodged at the last second, using his sword to sever one of its wings. He thought cutting off its wings might help him reach Shaun, but the falcon regenerated and returned. Will realized he needed to destroy its core to stop its regeneration. Shaun commanded the falcon to attack, launching a dual-sided fire assault. Will defended against the falcon's fire with his sword and used his gauntlet to redirect Shaun's fire blast. He noted that guardians typically defended, but this one was attacking from all angles. Maes and Edwards watched, impressed by the high level of skill on display, noting that Shaun had surpassed the typical student level. Fire Scout Raj was amazed by Shaun's control of high-level fire magic and the summoning of a guardian. Learning that Shaun was the heir to House Ulster, known for flame magic, Raj speculated a catalyst must have triggered Shaun's breakthrough. He praised the Grand Magic Festival for showcasing such talent, and instructed his subordinates to report back to Lord Cariot about Shaun's promising potential. Will recognized Shaun's increased strength, while Shaun taunted him, noting Will had fought better when defeating the evil sentinel. Confused, Will questioned why they were fighting, saying there was no reason for conflict. Shaun, frustrated, pointed out how Will's refusal to acknowledge him fueled his anger. Will admitted he resented Shaun and had long imagined revenge, but he needed to defeat Julius and didn't have time for this fight. Shaun's irritation grew, and he demanded Will pay attention to him, shouting his frustration. Shocked, Will realized Shaun's perspective and acknowledged that deep down, he had always wanted Shaun's recognition. Accepting that desire, Will resolved to meet Shaun's challenge with everything he had. Shaun, pleased that Will was finally taking their fight seriously, prepared to unleash a large-scale fire attack using the Fire Falcon Guardian and multiple magic circles. Will noted the simultaneous attack and decided to counter it. As the Fire Falcon and Fire Bombardment came at him, Will dodged the fire, anticipating the Falcon's path, and struck at its core, managing to slice through it. A massive blast erupted behind Will, who charged toward Shaun. In response, Shaun prepared his most powerful attack yet. Before Shaun could fire, Colette intervened by summoning a solid wall, which deflected Shaun's blast and dispersed the fire. Both Shaun and Will were stunned by her sudden appearance. Will, unable to halt his charge, collided with the wall. Both he and Shaun fell to the ground, looking up at Colette, who appeared with her clothes torn from a recent blast and a trap she had set off. Will asked about Julius's whereabouts, and Colette replied that she had defeated him, but he had disappeared. Reacting to Colette's torn clothes, Shaun screamed in shock and scolded her for appearing indecent. Colette, unfazed, blamed Shaun for starting the fight and instructed Will to go ahead and settle his score with Julius. Despite Shaun's protests, Colette asserted herself, telling Shaun he had interfered with Will's chance to prove himself. Will, appearing behind Colette, draped his cloak over her, calming her down. He thanked Colette. As Will prepared to leave, he promised Shaun they would have a real fight next time. Shaun, frustrated, demanded that Will fight him now. Maes announced the imminent arrival of the lead squads in the stadium and speculated that Squad 9, led by Julius Reinberg, would claim victory unchallenged. However, to everyone's surprise, Will leaped over the stadium walls and landed behind Julius's squad. He declared his challenge to Julius, who responded with an unfazed and evil grin. At the Wizard's Tower, Lady Alfaria was napping when her assistant, Cerisa, woke her with a gentle slap and chided her for not taking her role as a mage Vander seriously. Cerisa presented documents about potential candidates, highlighting Julius Reinberg from the Ice faction as a standout option who might become Alfaria's successor. Alfaria agreed that Julius could be a potential successor if the information was accurate. In the arena, as the crown attack approached its climax, Will faced Julius's squad. Julius taunted Will, expressing his desire to humiliate him rather than win easily. He used an ice flower to create a smoke screen around Will. Despite the obscured vision, Will sensed the movement of his opponents, deduced they were trying to surround him, and prepared to counterattack. Will, having identified his opponent's positions, attacked what he believed to be Julius, only to be surprised by a fourth and then a fifth shot. Julius revealed that his clones would soon explode, and indeed, Will was encased in ice by Julius's powerful spell, Elgrace Frost. Julius boasted about his self-taught mastery of this spell and criticized Albie's Vina, claiming to have reached a level comparable to a Magia Vander. As Will struggled, surrounded by clones firing ice shards, he noticed the attacks had ceased and saw that 3 clones had formed a triangular ice cage around him. Despite his attempts to break free, the ice cage remained intact, trapping Will as his back began to frost. Julius, with a menacing grin, prepared to finish Will using a massive ice meteor. The overwhelming power of the attack was noted by Maes and Edwards, who admired Julius's skill and commented on his impressive accumulation of credits. Julius boasted to the scouts, claiming his mastery of Alfaria's secret art made him her rightful successor. The crowd cheered, impressed by his display. However, as the ice shard crashed down on Will, he emerged unscathed, calmly expressing that Julius's magic had merely helped him cool off. Annoyed, Julius vowed to humiliate Will further. Will then used the chaos of Julius's ice shards to stealthily attack and defeat Julius's squad members in a single strike. The crowd erupted in excitement as Will took down 2 members of Squad 9, and Julius's clones began to shatter. Will revealed that Julius's control over his clones was limited and that he was far from matching Alfaria's true skill. Enraged, Julius could only respond with fury. In the Wizard's Tower, Lady Alfaria considered Julius Reinberg as a potential successor but expressed a desire for a lone sword by her side rather than just a successor. Meanwhile, in the arena, Will exposed flaws in Julius's mastery of Ars Weiss, revealing that Julius relied on teammates for control and had not fully mastered the spell. Julius, frustrated and defensive, attacked Will with ice but Will countered effectively, dodging and using his sword for protection. Julius boasted about his clone's perfect imitation, but Will, recognizing the real Julius by detecting subtle temperature differences in the ice, attacked him directly. Julius was shocked by Will's precise knowledge of the spell, which he attributed to his study of Alfaria's magic from their shared past as orphans. As the fight continued, the spectators, including Alfaria, watched intently, with Alfaria reflecting on their shared history and memories, praising his hard work and saying it won't be for nothing. In the arena, Will exposed Julius's misuse of Alfaria's magic, revealing that Ars Weiss, a spell created by Alfaria as a toddler, had significant flaws. Julius, stunned by this revelation, dropped to his knees in shock when Will easily countered his attacks. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Julius summons an ice aura, freezing the ground around him and creating 8 ice clones in a reverse spear formation. Maius exclaims in surprise as Julius reveals his ability to create more than 4 doubles, intending to use sheer numbers to overpower Will. Unfazed, Will recalls enduring attacks from 10 Elfie clones. As the battle unfolds, Will methodically destroys each ice clone with his sword, while Julius grows increasingly terrified. Despite Julius's frantic attempts to fight back, Will effortlessly counters and dismantles the clones. He finishes by throwing his sword into the last clone's forehead, shattering it, and driving Julius into a panicked retreat. Julius, desperate and frightened, tries to defend himself, but Will closes in, delivering a powerful punch to Julius's face, sending him crashing to the ground with his teeth shattered. The spectators are left stunned. Maius announces that Will, the so-called no talent, has destroyed the elite Julius, and even Miss Perfect takes notice. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Maius declared that there was no one left to challenge Will, leaving only the task of claiming the crown. However, Wignall appeared unexpectedly, having stealthily taken the crown while everyone was distracted by the duel. He placed the crown on his head, declaring himself the winner and becoming the official champion. Edward smiled in approval, and Maius, seeing his bet pay off, was thrilled. The crowd was stunned by this twist, and fireworks celebrated Wignall's victory. Sarisa noted that the crown attack had concluded. Alfaria, visibly upset, asked Sarisa about spells to redo the past or erase memories, but Sarisa told her no such magic existed. Alfaria lamented her past actions, expressing regret for her behavior towards Will and her desire to keep playing with him despite exposing her dark past. Will, now at the crown stand, was met by Colette, who expressed her happiness despite her tears. Shaun vowed to defeat Will in the future. Will, determined, raised his fist towards the mage tower, acknowledging that he had kept his promise despite the outcome.